Picture this. A mother writes letters to her daughters, filled with hope and plans for the future. She talks about cooking Thanksgiving dinner, finding a new job, building a life with someone she cares about. These aren't the words of someone planning to disappear. These are the words of someone planning to live. But on November 13th, 2008, in a small Alabama town, this 32-year-old mother vanished without a trace from a house on Highway 41. 16 years later, her daughters still don't know what happened to her. This is Cold Case Unsealed, and today we're diving into a disappearance that raises more questions than answers. Before we go any further, if you're someone who believes every missing person deserves justice, who thinks these forgotten cases need to be solved, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We uncover the cases the system forgot, and your support helps us keep fighting for answers. Now, let's get into this mystery. November 13th, 2008. Leeds, Alabama. A town where everyone supposedly knows everyone's business. A place where secrets should be hard to keep. But somehow, a woman vanishes from this tight-knit community, and it takes 69 days before anyone even files a missing persons report. 69 days. More than 2 months. By the time law enforcement gets involved, the trail has gone completely cold. Let me paint you a picture of who this woman was. She stood 5 feet 11 inches tall. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. At 120 pounds, she had a slender frame that made her height even more noticeable. She had the kind of appearance that should make her hard to forget, hard to miss in a crowd. Her ears were pierced. She had a tattoo on her left breast, a distinguishing mark that could help identify her. She normally used the last name Blizzard, though her legal name was Adkins. These physical details matter because in missing persons cases, every detail could be the one that brings someone home. But beyond the physical description, beyond the statistics, she was a human being with a story. She was a mother to 2 daughters. And yes, she struggled. She had a history of prescription drug abuse. She battled other substance dependencies too. There were indications she may have dealt with mental health issues, though the records aren't entirely clear on that front. Her addiction had cost her custody of her daughters, a reality that must have broken her heart every single day. But here's what's crucial to understand about this case. Despite losing custody, despite her struggles, she never abandoned her children. Never. She called them every single week. Every week, without fail, those girls heard their mother's voice on the phone. She saw her relatives at least once a month, making sure her daughters knew she loved them, knew she was fighting to get better, knew she hadn't given up. This wasn't a woman who had checked out of her responsibilities. This wasn't someone who had stopped caring. This was a mother doing everything she could within the constraints of her situation to maintain a connection with her children. The people who knew her described a heartbreaking pattern that had repeated itself over and over in her adult life. She would stay with family members for a few months at a time, trying desperately to get clean, to overcome the addiction that had such a powerful grip on her life. During these periods, she would be surrounded by people who loved her, who supported her recovery, who wanted nothing more than to see her succeed. But inevitably, the pattern would shift. She would eventually move in with a boyfriend. Sometimes these relationships would last weeks, sometimes months. But the cycle was predictable in its tragedy. Her family knew this pattern intimately. They had watched it unfold multiple times. They understood that addiction doesn't follow a straight line, that recovery is rarely a simple journey from point A to point B. They had learned to brace themselves for the ups and downs, the moments of hope followed by setbacks. But they also knew their sister, their daughter, their aunt. They knew her heart. They knew that no matter how far down the addiction pulled her, she always came back. She always called. She always showed up for those monthly visits, which is exactly why alarm bells started ringing when the calls stopped. Think about it from the family's perspective. You have a loved one who struggles with addiction, yes, but who has maintained consistent contact for years. Every single week, that phone rings. Every single month, you see her face. You know the pattern. You know that even when things are bad, even when she's using, even when she's living with someone who might not be good for her, she still reaches out. That contact is the one constant you can rely on. Now imagine that contact suddenly stops. No phone call, no visit. Thanksgiving comes and goes, and she doesn't show up. She had written about wanting to cook Thanksgiving dinner. She had plans. She had talked about it with such excitement in those letters to her daughters. But Thanksgiving arrives, and there's nothing. No call. No explanation. Just silence. December passes. Christmas comes and goes. Still nothing. For a family that had learned to navigate the difficult terrain of loving someone with addiction, this silence was deafening. This wasn't part of the pattern. This was something new. This was something wrong. On January 21st, 2009, her brother and sister-in-law in North Carolina finally contacted the authorities to report her missing. They had waited, hoping she would resurface, hoping there was some explanation for the silence. Maybe she had lost her phone. Maybe she was in rehab somewhere and couldn't contact them. Maybe she was embarrassed about a relapse and needed time before reaching out. They had probably cycled through every possible explanation, every possible reason for why their weekly calls had stopped. But by January, they couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was deeply wrong. So they filed the report, starting the official investigation into what had happened to their loved one. But here's the devastating reality. By the time that report was filed, it had been 69 days since anyone had seen her. 69 days in which evidence could have been lost, memories could have faded, witnesses could have disappeared. In missing persons cases, the first 48 hours are considered critical. After 69 days, the chances of finding someone alive drop dramatically. The investigation began with the last known facts. She had been living with a man on Highway 41 in Leeds, Alabama. This wasn't just a casual dating situation. They were living together. She had written to her daughters about this man, about their plans together, about wanting to build a future with him. In those letters, she talked about how he treated her, about their day-to-day life together. These letters would become crucial pieces of evidence, not because of what they said, but because of what they revealed about her state of mind in the days and weeks before she disappeared. Let me read you some of what she wrote, paraphrased to protect the exact wording of private correspondence. She told her daughters she was looking for a new job, actively searching for employment. She wrote about her housemate, the man she was living with, describing their interactions and how they got along. She expressed hope about their future together. She specifically mentioned wanting to cook Thanksgiving dinner for him. She talked about plans to move into an apartment with him, making their living situation more permanent, more official. These are not the words of someone planning to vanish. These are not the thoughts of someone who has given up on life. When you read these letters, you see a woman who, despite all her struggles, despite the addiction, despite losing custody of her children, was still fighting for a future. She was making plans. She was looking ahead. She was trying to build something. So what happened between the time she wrote those hopeful letters and November 13th, 2008? What changed? What went so catastrophically wrong that this woman who was planning Thanksgiving dinner simply disappeared? When investigators finally tracked down the boyfriend, the man she had been living with on Highway 41, his story was interesting. And by interesting, I mean immediately questionable. According to him, she had simply moved out. Just like that. No big fight. No dramatic confrontation. She had just packed up her things and left. Where did she go? Well, according to the boyfriend, she had gone to Houston, Texas. Now, you might be wondering, why Houston? What connection did she have to Houston? According to the boyfriend's story, she had been talking to some man on Facebook, someone she had connected with on social media. And apparently, she had decided to leave Leeds, Alabama, leave the man she had been writing to her daughters about, leave the apartment they were planning to move into together, leave the Thanksgiving dinner she wanted to cook, and go to Houston to be with this Facebook connection. Let me be very clear about something. In 2008, Facebook was still relatively new. It had only been open to the general public in 2006. People were still figuring out social media, still navigating online relationships. But even accounting for the newness of the platform, this story has problems. Big problems. First, she had just written to her daughters about her plans with this boyfriend. The letters were recent, filled with hope and future plans. There was no mention of another man. No indication she was unhappy. No hint that she was planning to leave. Second, if she had voluntarily left to go to Houston, why wouldn't she tell her family? Remember, this is a woman who called her daughters every single week. Even when things were bad, even when she was struggling, she maintained that contact. Are we really supposed to believe she would suddenly cut off all communication and move to another state without telling anyone? Third, and this is crucial, if she had left voluntarily to start a new life in Houston, Why would she abandon the one thing she had fought so hard to maintain? Her relationship with her daughters. Those weekly phone calls weren't just habit. They were her lifeline. They were proof to herself and to her children that she hadn't given up, that she was still their mother, that she still cared. Walking away from that would mean walking away from the most important thing in her life. But investigators did their job. They didn't just dismiss the boyfriend's story out of hand. They followed up on it. They tracked down the man in Houston that the boyfriend had mentioned. The man she had allegedly been talking to on Facebook. The man she had supposedly left everything behind to be with. And what did this man in Houston say when police contacted him? He hadn't seen her in years. Years. Not months. Not weeks. Years. Let that sink in for a moment. The boyfriend's entire explanation for where she had gone. His complete alibi for why she had left his house and never been seen again, fell apart with a single conversation. The Houston connection didn't exist. It was either a complete fabrication or a massive misunderstanding, and either way, it meant the boyfriend had no credible explanation for where she had gone. This is where the case gets really troubling, because now we have a situation where a woman disappears from a man's house. That man provides an explanation that doesn't check out, and yet somehow, there's not enough evidence to charge him with anything. Not enough to make an arrest. Not enough to definitively say what happened in that house on Highway 41. Think about the dynamics of this situation. She was living with him. She was dependent on him for housing. She had a history of prescription drug abuse and other substance dependencies. She may have had mental health issues that made her vulnerable. She didn't have custody of her children, which meant she didn't have the stability and support system that custody would have provided. In many ways, she was isolated, vulnerable, and dependent. When someone in that position disappears, and the last person to see them alive gives a story that immediately falls apart, it raises serious red flags. But raising red flags isn't the same as having evidence. And without evidence, without a body, without witnesses, it becomes incredibly difficult to prove what happened. Let's talk about the timeline in more detail, because understanding the sequence of events is crucial to understanding why this case is so frustrating and so tragic. November 13th, 2008 is the last confirmed sighting. That's the last day anyone can definitively say they saw her alive. After that date, the trail goes cold. No confirmed sightings. No credit card usage. No phone calls. No social media activity. Nothing. Between November 13th and January 21st, 69 days pass. During this time, her family is growing increasingly concerned. The weekly phone calls have stopped. She doesn't show up for Thanksgiving. Christmas comes and goes without a word. Her family members are probably calling around, asking if anyone has heard from her, checking with friends and other relatives. But at what point do you go from worried to officially reporting someone missing? Especially when that person has a history of addiction and unpredictable behavior. It's a difficult line to walk. On January 21st, 2009, the official missing persons report is filed by her brother and sister-in-law in North Carolina. This is now the start of the official investigation. Police begin trying to piece together what happened to her. They interview the boyfriend. They check with the man in Houston. They talk to family members, trying to establish a timeline and understand her state of mind before she disappeared. But here's another wrinkle in this case that makes it even more complicated. In January 2009, the same month she was reported missing, a warrant was issued for her arrest. She had pleaded guilty to theft and drug possession charges in 2008. As part of her sentence, she had been given a conditional suspended sentence. Essentially, she wasn't going to jail, but she had to comply with certain terms. Probation, possibly drug testing, checking in with a probation officer, that sort of thing. She failed to comply with those terms. And in January 2009, a warrant was issued for failing to meet the conditions of her suspended sentence. Now, on the surface, this might seem like evidence that she had simply run away, that she knew there was a warrant coming and decided to disappear rather than face the consequences. But let's think about the timeline here. The charges were from 2008. She had already pleaded guilty. She had already been sentenced. If she was going to run to avoid consequences, wouldn't she have done it before pleading guilty? Why would you go through the entire court process, plead guilty, accept a suspended sentence, and then run? It doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint. More likely, she disappeared in November, and by January, when she hadn't checked in with her probation officer, When she hadn't complied with whatever the terms of her sentence were, the system automatically generated a warrant. The warrant wasn't the cause of her disappearance. It was a consequence of it. But having an active warrant complicates the investigation in some ways. It means that if she is alive somewhere, if she did voluntarily disappear, she has a reason not to surface. Coming forward would mean facing arrest, facing potential jail time for violating the terms of her sentence. It creates a barrier to her coming home, even if she wanted to. Now let's talk about the theories in this case, because there are essentially three main possibilities, each with its own supporting evidence and its own problems. Theory number 1. She died of a drug overdose. One of her own children believes this is what happened. And it's not hard to see why this theory has traction. She had a documented history of prescription drug abuse and other substance dependencies. Overdose deaths among people struggling with addiction are tragically common. In 2008, the opioid crisis was already well underway in America, though it hadn't yet reached the devastating levels it would hit in the following decade. If she overdosed, it could explain the sudden disappearance. Could explain why there was no phone call, no goodbye, no explanation to her family. Overdoses can happen quickly and unexpectedly. Someone using drugs, especially if they've recently tried to get clean and then relapsed, can misjudge their tolerance level. What used to be a normal dose can become a fatal dose if your body has lost its tolerance during a period of sobriety. But here's the problem with the overdose theory. Where is her body? If she overdosed at the house on Highway 41, what happened to her remains? Did the boyfriend panic and dispose of her body to avoid legal consequences? That would still be a crime. That would still be something investigators could potentially charge him with. If she overdosed somewhere else, who was she with? Why has no one come forward? Why has her body never been found? In 16 years, with all the construction, all the development, all the changes that happened to a landscape over nearly 2 decades, you would think a body would have been discovered if it was disposed of locally. Which means either it was hidden extremely well, or it was taken somewhere far from Leeds, Alabama, or the overdose theory is wrong. Theory number 2, foul play. This is the theory that keeps investigators up at night, because it's the one with the most disturbing implications. A woman disappears from a man's house. That man's story about where she went doesn't check out. She had a history of relationships with men who may not have had her best interests at heart. The dynamics of her situation, vulnerable and dependent, made her an easy target for someone with bad intentions. If foul play was involved, what happened? Was there an argument that turned violent? Did the boyfriend or someone else harm her intentionally or accidentally? Was her death the result of domestic violence that escalated beyond control? And if she was killed, how was her body disposed of so thoroughly that it has never been found? The foul play theory is supported by several troubling facts. The boyfriend's story about Houston fell apart immediately. He was the last person to see her alive. She disappeared from his house. These are all red flags in any missing persons case. When someone's significant other is the last person to see them and provides a false alibi for their whereabouts, it raises serious suspicions. But again, suspicion isn't evidence. You can't charge someone with murder without a body, without witnesses, without some form of concrete proof that a crime occurred. And in this case, despite the red flags, there apparently wasn't enough evidence to move forward with charges. Theory number 3, voluntary disappearance. Could she have simply walked away from her entire life? Could she have decided that the weight of her addiction, the shame of losing custody of her children, the pressure of the warrant, the stress of trying to maintain sobriety while living with someone who may or may not have been supportive of her recovery, could all of that have become too much? Could she have decided to start over somewhere with a new identity, a new life, leaving everything and everyone behind? Her family adamantly rejects this theory. They point to the weekly phone calls, the monthly visits, the letters to her daughters. This wasn't a woman who was pulling away from her family. This wasn't someone who was gradually distancing herself in preparation for disappearing. The opposite was true. She was actively engaged in her children's lives. She was making plans for the future. She was looking for a job, talking about moving into an apartment, planning to cook Thanksgiving dinner. People who voluntarily disappear usually leave some kind of trail, even if they're trying not to. They use their social security number to get a job. They get a driver's license in a new state. They access bank accounts. They contact someone even if it's years later. In 16 years, there has been no credible sighting, no financial activity, no contact with family. Nothing. For the voluntary disappearance theory to be true, she would have had to completely cut herself off from her former life, never once reaching out to her daughters, never once accessing any of her old accounts or using her real identity. It's possible, but it's incredibly difficult to sustain. And it goes against everything her family knew about her character and her commitment to her children. So we're left with three theories, none of which has enough evidence to be proven, none of which can be completely ruled out. This is the frustrating reality of cold cases. Sometimes there just isn't enough information to reach a definitive conclusion. But that doesn't mean we stop asking questions. That doesn't mean we accept the mystery and move on. Let's dig deeper into what we know about her life in the months before she disappeared. The letters to her daughters are a crucial piece of this puzzle. They give us insight into her mental state, her hopes, her fears, her daily reality. When someone disappears, investigators often look for signs of planning. Did they withdraw large amounts of money? Did they research how to disappear? Did they say goodbye to people in subtle ways? Did they put their affairs in order? There's no evidence of any of that here. The letters talk about future plans, not about endings. She was looking for a job, which suggests she planned to stay in Leeds, to build a life there. She was talking about moving into an apartment with her boyfriend, which indicates she saw a future with him, at least at the time she wrote those letters. She wanted to cook Thanksgiving dinner, a domestic, ordinary plan that speaks to someone trying to create normalcy and stability. If you're planning to disappear, you don't make plans for Thanksgiving dinner. You don't talk about getting a new job in the same town. You don't write to your children about your hopes for the future. These letters are evidence that whatever happened to her, it wasn't something she planned. The relationship with the boyfriend is another crucial element. What was that relationship really like? In her letters, she talked about how he treated her. We don't know exactly what she said, but the fact that she felt the need to discuss his treatment of her is interesting. Was it good treatment she was happy about? Or was she trying to reassure herself and her daughters about a situation that maybe wasn't as stable as she wanted it to be? People in abusive relationships often downplay the abuse or make excuses for their partner's behavior. They talk about the good times, the plans for the future, the hope that things will get better. Was that what was happening here? Or was this genuinely a relationship she felt positive about? We know she had a pattern of living with boyfriends after staying with family members. This pattern suggests a couple of things. First, that she struggled with independence and stability. Living with family provided structure and support, but it also probably came with rules and expectations that were hard to maintain, especially if she was using. Moving in with a boyfriend might have felt like more freedom, less judgment, less pressure. But it also meant less stability, less support, and potentially more vulnerability. Second, this pattern suggests that relationships were important to her, maybe too important. When you're struggling with addiction and you've lost custody of your children, romantic relationships can become a source of identity and purpose. They can fill a void. But they can also be dangerous, especially if you're choosing partners who are also struggling with addiction or who are controlling or abusive. The fact that she was living with this particular man in November 2008 raises questions. How long had they been together? How did they meet? What was his background? Did he have a criminal history? Was he also struggling with addiction? These are all questions that investigators would have asked, but the answers haven't been made public. What we do know is that his story about her going to Houston was either a lie or a completely mistaken belief. Either way, it means he didn't actually know where she went after she left his house, assuming she did leave. Or it means he made up a story to cover up what really happened. Without more information about him, about their relationship, about what life was like in that house on Highway 41, it's impossible to know for certain what happened. Let's talk about the community response to her disappearance. Leeds, Alabama is a small town. In 2008, the population was around 11,000 people. It's the kind of place where people generally know their neighbors, where news travels fast, where a missing person would typically generate significant community attention. But there doesn't seem to have been a large-scale search effort, no massive publicity campaign, no community coming together to find her. Why not? Part of it might be the 69-day delay in reporting her missing. By the time the official report was filed, the community had already moved on. People might have heard she'd moved to Houston or left town. The story might have circulated that she was running from a warrant. There might have been assumptions made about her based on her history of addiction. This is one of the tragic realities of missing persons cases involving people who struggle with addiction or who have criminal records. Society tends to care less. There's less media coverage, less public outcry, less pressure on law enforcement to find answers. It's as if these lives are worth less, as if these disappearances are somehow less important because the person had struggles or made mistakes. But she was still a mother. She was still a daughter, a sister, an aunt. She was still a human being who deserved to be found, who deserved justice if something criminal happened to her. Her struggles with addiction don't make her disappearance less tragic. If anything, they make it more tragic because she was already fighting such a difficult battle, and then something happened that took away any chance she had of winning that fight. If you're still watching at this point, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and just type, "I am here." Let me know you're invested in this case, that you believe this woman deserves justice, that you're not giving up on finding answers. Your engagement helps us bring attention to these forgotten cases, and it reminds us why we do this work. The investigation into her disappearance has been ongoing for 16 years now, though the level of active investigation has likely decreased significantly over time. In the early days, when the report was first filed, investigators would have been conducting interviews, following leads, checking surveillance footage if any was available, looking at phone records, trying to piece together her movements in the days before she disappeared. But as time goes on and leads dry up, cold cases get moved to the back burner. Detectives retire or move to different departments. Files get stored away. The case remains open, technically, but there's no one actively working on it day to day. This is the reality for thousands of missing persons cases across the country. They become cold cases not because investigators don't care, but because there's simply nowhere else to go without new information. What would constitute new information in this case? A credible sighting would be huge, though after 16 years, that becomes less and less likely. The discovery of remains would obviously be a major development. Someone coming forward with information about what happened. Perhaps someone who was afraid to speak up before or who has been carrying the guilt of knowing something for all these years. Technology improvements might also help. DNA databases have expanded significantly since 2008. Forensic techniques have improved. If there's any physical evidence from the original investigation, it might be worth re-examining with modern technology. But the most likely source of new information would be someone who knows something talking to police. In cases like this, someone usually knows what happened. Maybe it's the boyfriend. Maybe it's a friend or family member of the boyfriend. Maybe it's someone she was with in her final hours or days. Maybe it's someone who helped dispose of evidence. Secrets like this are heavy burdens to carry, and sometimes people reach a point where they can't carry them anymore. If someone out there knows what happened to her, if someone is reading this or watching this and has information, please come forward. Contact the Leeds Police Department or the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. You can do it anonymously if you're afraid. There are tip lines that protect your identity. What you know could bring closure to a family that has been suffering for 16 years. Could bring justice for a woman who deserves it. Let's think about her daughters for a moment. In November 2008, they were young. Their mother didn't have custody, but they knew her. They talked to her every week on the phone. They saw her at least once a month. She was a presence in their lives, even if she wasn't there day to day. They knew she loved them. They knew she was fighting to get better, fighting to be the mother they deserved. And then one day, the phone calls stopped. How do you explain that to a child? How do you tell them that their mother, who always called every week without fail, just isn't calling anymore? At first, you probably make excuses. Maybe she's sick. Maybe she lost her phone. Maybe she's in a place where she can't call right now. You probably keep hoping that next week, the phone will ring and everything will be okay. But weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And at some point, you have to accept that the phone isn't going to ring. Your mother isn't going to call. You don't know if she's alive or dead. You don't know if she chose to leave or if something terrible happened to her. You're left with questions that may never be answered, and that uncertainty is its own special kind of torture. Now those daughters are grown. They've lived more of their lives without their mother than with her. They've had to navigate adolescence and young adulthood without her guidance, without her support, without even knowing if she's alive to be proud of them or to see who they've become. One of them believes their mother died of an overdose. That's the story they've told themselves to make sense of the senseless. It's the explanation that allows them to believe their mother didn't choose to leave them, that something tragic and accidental happened rather than something deliberately cruel. But not knowing for certain means they can't fully grieve. They can't have closure. There's no grave to visit, no memorial service to attend, no final goodbye. They're stuck in this limbo between hope and despair, between believing their mother is dead and wondering if maybe, somehow, she's alive out there somewhere. The psychological toll of having a missing loved one is well documented. It's sometimes called ambiguous loss, a type of grief that can't be resolved because there's no certainty about what happened. It's grief without an ending, mourning without closure. Studies have shown that family members of missing persons often struggle with depression, anxiety, and complicated grief that can last for decades. Her family members, her brother and sister-in-law who filed the missing persons report, have been carrying this weight for 16 years. They've probably gone through every possible scenario in their minds 1,000 times. They've probably second-guessed every decision they made. Should they have reported her missing sooner? Should they have been more insistent about checking on her? Could they have done something differently that might have changed the outcome? These are the questions that haunt the families of missing persons. They know, rationally, that her disappearance wasn't their fault. But emotion isn't rational. Love isn't rational. When someone you love goes missing, you can't help but wonder if there was something you could have done to prevent it. Let's examine some of the practical challenges in this case that make it so difficult to solve. First, the passage of time. 69 days between her disappearance and the official report is a massive obstacle. Memories fade. Physical evidence degrades or disappears. Witnesses move away. Security footage, if there was any, would have been recorded over long ago. The trail goes cold very quickly when that much time passes. Second, the transient nature of her lifestyle. She moved from place to place, staying with family members and then with boyfriends. This makes it harder to establish a consistent timeline, harder to know who she was in contact with, harder to identify potential suspects or witnesses. When someone has a more stable, predictable routine, it's easier to notice when something is out of place. But when someone's life is already characterized by frequent moves and changing circumstances, it's harder to identify what's normal versus what's a red flag. Third, her vulnerability due to addiction. This made her less likely to be reported missing quickly, less likely to generate public sympathy, less likely to have the resources and support system that would make finding her easier. It also means she may have been in contact with people who were themselves involved in illegal activity and therefore unlikely to cooperate with police. Fourth, the lack of physical evidence. There's no crime scene. There's no body. There's no weapon. There's no forensic evidence that we know of. Without physical evidence, cases rely heavily on witness testimony, and in this case, the main witness, the boyfriend, provided a story that didn't check out. But inconsistent testimony isn't enough to charge someone with a crime. You need something more concrete. Fifth, jurisdictional issues. She disappeared from Leeds, Alabama, but her family who reported her missing were in North Carolina. The alleged Houston connection meant investigators had to coordinate across state lines. These jurisdictional complexities can slow down investigations and make communication more difficult. Sixth, and this is just the harsh reality of law enforcement, there are limited resources for investigating missing persons cases, especially when the missing person is an adult with a history that might suggest they left voluntarily. Police departments have to triage their cases based on available resources and the likelihood of finding the person alive. When there's no evidence of foul play, no ransom demand, no obvious crime, these cases can get less attention than they deserve. But none of these challenges mean we should give up. None of these obstacles are insurmountable. Cases have been solved decades after they went cold. Bodies have been found years after someone disappeared. Witnesses have come forward long after the fact. Technology has cracked cases that seemed impossible to solve. There's always hope. Let's talk about some other missing persons cases that share similarities with this one, because understanding patterns can sometimes help us understand individual cases. There are hundreds, probably thousands, of cases in the United States involving women who disappeared while struggling with addiction. These women are some of the most vulnerable members of our society, and they're also the least likely to have their disappearances thoroughly investigated. Part of the problem is societal prejudice. When a middle-class mother of two with no criminal record disappears, it makes national news. There are massive search efforts, media coverage, public pressure on law enforcement. But when a woman with a history of drug use and a criminal record disappears, the assumption is often that she's just moved on. or she's using drugs somewhere, or she doesn't want to be found. The public doesn't rally around these cases the same way. But these women are just as deserving of being found. Their lives matter just as much. Their families grieve just as deeply. And in many cases, these women are victims of crimes, not people who chose to disappear. Predators specifically target vulnerable women because they know these cases won't generate public outrage, won't be investigated as thoroughly, won't result in the kind of pressure that leads to arrests and convictions. There's also the issue of how addiction intersects with domestic violence. Women struggling with addiction are at higher risk of being in abusive relationships. They're more likely to be dependent on their partners for housing and financial support. They're more likely to be isolated from family and friends. All of these factors make them vulnerable to violence and make it easier for that violence to be hidden. In this case, we don't know for certain that the boyfriend was abusive. We don't know if there was violence in that relationship. But we do know that she was living with him, that she may have been dependent on him, and that his story about where she went doesn't hold up. Those facts create a concerning picture. The intersection of addiction, poverty, unstable housing, and relationship dependency creates what researchers call structural vulnerability. These are circumstances that make certain people more vulnerable to harm not because of individual choices, but because of systemic factors that are often beyond their control. Understanding this helps us understand why cases like this happen and why they're so difficult to solve. Let's also consider the role of prescription drug abuse specifically in this case. In 2008, prescription opioid abuse was becoming a major crisis in America. Drugs like OxyContin, Vicodin, and other prescription painkillers were being overprescribed by doctors and creating addiction in millions of people. Unlike illegal drugs like heroin, prescription drugs initially had a veneer of legitimacy. People started using them because a doctor prescribed them, and then found themselves addicted. The stigma around prescription drug abuse was different than the stigma around illegal drug use, but it was still there. People who became addicted to prescription medications often felt shame and tried to hide their addiction. They might not have seen themselves as drug addicts in the traditional sense, which could have made it harder for them to seek help or for their families to recognize the severity of the problem. By 2008, the prescription drug crisis was well underway in Alabama and across the South. Pills were everywhere. Doctors were writing prescriptions without adequate oversight. Pill mills were operating openly in some areas, and people were dying. The overdose death rate was climbing steadily, though it wouldn't reach its peak for several more years. For someone struggling with prescription drug addiction in 2008 in a small Alabama town, treatment options would have been limited. There might have been a local Narcotics Anonymous meeting, maybe a counselor or two, possibly a methadone clinic within driving distance. But comprehensive addiction treatment, the kind that addresses the underlying trauma and mental health issues that often accompany addiction, would have been hard to access, especially without insurance or financial resources. This context matters because it helps us understand the challenges she was facing. She wasn't just dealing with addiction in a vacuum. She was dealing with it in a time and place where addiction was epidemic, where treatment was scarce, where stigma was high, and where the systems that were supposed to help people like her were failing. Her letters to her daughters mentioned that she was looking for a job. Finding employment when you have a criminal record for drug-related offenses is incredibly difficult. Most employers run background checks. A conviction for theft and drug possession would be an automatic disqualification for many positions. This creates a vicious cycle where people with records can't find legitimate work, which makes it harder to maintain sobriety, which can lead to more criminal activity, which makes the record worse. So when she wrote about looking for a job, she was probably facing rejection after rejection. The hope in those letters might have been masking a lot of frustration and despair. She wanted to work. She wanted to contribute. She wanted to build a stable life. But the system was stacked against her in ways that most people never have to experience. The warrant that was issued in January 2009 for failing to comply with the terms of her suspended sentence is another example of how the criminal justice system can compound problems for people struggling with addiction. She had pleaded guilty. She had accepted responsibility. But suspended sentences come with conditions that can be very difficult to meet when you're dealing with addiction and unstable housing and limited resources. Maybe she missed a meeting with her probation officer because she didn't have transportation. Maybe she couldn't afford the fees associated with her probation. Maybe she failed a drug test because she had relapsed. We don't know the specifics of why the warrant was issued, but what we do know is that having an active warrant created another barrier to her coming home, if she was alive and able to do so. This is part of the tragedy of cases like this. The systems that are supposed to help people often end up trapping them instead. And when someone disappears while caught in these systems, the investigation can be complicated by assumptions about their character, their choices, their worthiness of being found. Let's think about what the investigation would have looked like in those early months after she was reported missing. Detectives would have started with the basics. They would have interviewed the boyfriend multiple times, probably bringing him in for formal questioning at the police station. They would have asked him to walk them through the last time he saw her, what they talked about, whether they argued, what her mood was like, where she said she was going. His story about Houston would have been checked immediately. That's basic investigative work. You verify what people tell you. And when his story fell apart, when the man in Houston said he hadn't seen her in years, the boyfriend would have been asked to explain that discrepancy. What was his response? Did he claim he misunderstood? Did he say she had lied to him about where she was going? Did he change his story? We don't have access to those interview transcripts, but they would be crucial documents in understanding what happened. The way someone responds to having their alibi fall apart can be very telling. Do they get defensive? Do they lawyer up immediately? Do they try to offer alternative explanations? Or do they genuinely seem confused and concerned? Investigators would have also searched the house on Highway 41, assuming they had probable cause or the boyfriend's permission. They would have been looking for signs of a struggle, blood evidence, her belongings, anything that might indicate what happened to her. Did they find all her clothes still there, suggesting she didn't pack and leave? Or were her things gone, supporting the idea that she had moved out? They would have checked her phone records if she had a phone. Who was she calling in the days before she disappeared? Were there any suspicious calls or texts? Any patterns that might indicate she was planning to leave or that she was in trouble? They would have talked to neighbors. Did anyone hear arguing coming from the house? Did anyone see her leave? Did anyone notice anything unusual around the time of her disappearance? They would have canvassed local businesses. Did she have a regular routine? Did she go to a particular grocery store or gas station? Did anyone working at those places remember seeing her around the time she disappeared? They would have checked with local hospitals and clinics. Had she sought medical treatment for anything? Were there any records of injuries that might indicate domestic violence? They would have reached out to other people in her life. Friends, other family members, people she had stayed with in the past. Had anyone heard from her? Did anyone have any information about her state of mind or her plans? All of this is standard missing persons investigation work. But the problem is that in a case that's already 69 days cold when it's reported, much of this information is either gone or unreliable. People's memories of what happened 2 months ago are fuzzy. Security footage has been recorded over. Phone records might be harder to obtain. The trail has gone cold. And if the boyfriend wasn't cooperating, if he had lawyered up or simply refused to provide additional information beyond his initial statement, that would have created a brick wall for investigators. Without evidence of a crime, they couldn't get search warrants. Without witnesses or physical evidence, they couldn't charge him with anything. They would have been stuck. This is the frustrating reality of cases where someone disappears without a clear crime scene, without witnesses, without a body. The investigators might know in their gut what happened. They might be absolutely convinced that the boyfriend knows more than he's saying. But knowing something and proving it in court are two completely different things. Let's consider the possibility that she did overdose and that the boyfriend panicked and disposed of her body. This scenario would explain several things. It would explain why she disappeared so suddenly. It would explain why the boyfriend's story didn't make sense. He was making up a cover story to avoid being implicated in her death. It would explain why her body has never been found. He had time to hide it before anyone even knew she was missing. If this is what happened, where might her body be? Alabama has plenty of rural areas, forests, bodies of water where remains could be hidden. The boyfriend would have had local knowledge of the area. He might have known places that were isolated, places where he could dispose of evidence without being seen. But disposing of a body is harder than people think. It's heavy, difficult to move, leaves evidence. Unless you have a vehicle, unless you have help, unless you have a specific plan, it's very difficult to successfully hide human remains in a way that they're never found. Over 16 years, the landscape changes. Trees fall, rivers shift, construction happens. Remains that were hidden in 2008 might be in a completely different situation now. Someone might stumble across them while hiking or hunting. Road construction might uncover them. A heavy rain might wash away the soil covering them. The fact that no remains have been found in 16 years suggests either that they were very well hidden, or that they're in a location that people rarely go to, or that they're not in the Leeds area at all. It's also possible, of course, that she didn't die of an overdose at that location, that the overdose theory is wrong entirely. Another possibility within the foul play theory is that the boyfriend or someone else intentionally killed her. Maybe there was an argument that escalated. Maybe she threatened to leave or to tell someone something he didn't want known. Maybe it was a crime of passion, a moment of rage that resulted in her death. Or maybe it was more calculated. Maybe she knew something dangerous. Maybe she was involved in something that got her killed. Her history of drug use could have put her in contact with dangerous people. Drug dealers, other users, people involved in criminal enterprises. Could she have witnessed something she shouldn't have? Could she have owed money to someone dangerous? These are all possibilities, but there's no evidence pointing definitively to any of them. That's what makes this case so difficult. There are too many possibilities and not enough facts to narrow them down. Let's talk about another aspect of this case that's troubling. The gap between what the family knew and what was actually happening in her life. They knew she had a pattern of staying with family and then moving in with boyfriends. They knew she struggled with addiction. They knew she had lost custody of her children. But did they know the details of her relationship with this particular boyfriend? Did they know what life was like for her in that house on Highway 41? In her letters, she talked about her housemate and how he treated her. But letters can hide a lot. They can present the version of reality we want to be true rather than the reality that actually exists. She might have been trying to reassure her daughters that she was okay, even if she wasn't. She might have been trying to convince herself that the relationship was good, even if it had problems. Families of people struggling with addiction often face this dilemma. How much do you intervene? How much do you trust that your loved one is making good decisions? When do you respect their autonomy as an adult? And when do you step in because you're worried about their safety? Her brother and sister-in-law in North Carolina were maintaining regular contact through phone calls. They were seeing her at least monthly, but they were also far away. They couldn't drop by unannounced. They couldn't see for themselves what her living situation was really like. They had to rely on what she told them, and what she told them might not have been the complete truth. This geographic distance might have contributed to the delay in reporting her missing. If they had been local, they might have noticed sooner that something was wrong. They might have gone to the house on Highway 41 when she didn't call. They might have confronted the boyfriend earlier. But being in North Carolina, they could only work with the information they had, which was that the calls had stopped. The question of when to report someone missing when they have a history of unreliable behavior is a difficult one. If you report them missing every time they don't call for a week, you're wasting police resources and crying wolf. But if you wait too long, you lose crucial time in the investigation. Her family probably agonized over this decision. They probably went back and forth about whether to file the report, hoping each day that she would call and everything would be fine. By the time they did report her missing, they had probably exhausted all other possibilities. They had probably tried calling every number they had for her. They had probably reached out to other family members, to friends, to anyone who might know where she was. The missing persons report was their last resort, the acknowledgement that something was seriously wrong. Now let's think about this case from a broader perspective. What does it tell us about how missing persons cases are handled in this country? What does it reveal about the gaps in our system? First, it shows us that there's no national database or coordinated system for tracking missing persons. Each jurisdiction handles its own cases. There's no automatic flag that goes up when someone crosses state lines. If she did leave Alabama and go somewhere else, there's no system that would automatically connect her disappearance in Leeds with a Jane Doe found in another state. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMUS, has helped with this problem, but it wasn't launched until 2007, and it took years for it to be widely adopted. In 2009, when she was reported missing, not every jurisdiction was using NAMUS. Even now, not every case gets entered into the system, and not every set of remains gets checked against the database. Second, this case shows us how addiction and mental health issues complicate missing persons investigations. There's an assumption, often unspoken, that people with these issues are less reliable, more likely to have left voluntarily, less deserving of resources. This assumption can lead to less thorough investigations, less media coverage, less public pressure to find answers. Third, it demonstrates how crucial the first hours and days are in a missing persons case. The 69-day delay in this case was catastrophic for the investigation. It meant that whatever evidence existed was likely gone or degraded. It meant witnesses had time to forget or to coordinate their stories. It meant that if she had been taken somewhere, she could be anywhere in the country by the time the investigation started. Fourth, it highlights the difficulty of investigating cases without a clear crime scene or physical evidence. Our justice system requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Suspicions aren't enough. Gut feelings aren't enough. Even when investigators are convinced they know what happened, they can't move forward without evidence that would stand up in court. So where does this leave us? 16 years after her disappearance, what are the realistic possibilities for solving this case? New information could come from several sources. Someone who knows something might finally come forward. Deathbed confessions happen. People who were protecting someone might have a change of heart. Accomplices might decide they can't carry the secret anymore. Remains could be discovered. Hunters, hikers, construction workers, anyone working or exploring in rural areas might stumble across bones or other evidence. With modern DNA technology, even degraded remains can be identified. Technology might provide new avenues for investigation. Cell phone location data that wasn't available or wasn't checked in 2009 might still exist somewhere. Social media posts from around that time might contain clues. Digital forensics have advanced significantly in 16 years. The boyfriend or someone else connected to the case might slip up. They might tell someone something. They might make a post on social media that reveals information. They might get arrested for something else and decide to trade information about this case for a better deal. Cold case units sometimes take a fresh look at old cases. A new detective with fresh eyes might see something that was missed before. They might make connections that previous investigators didn't make. They might have access to new resources or new technology that wasn't available in 2009. But we also have to be realistic. After 16 years, many cold cases remain unsolved indefinitely.
Witnesses die.
Evidence is lost. Memories fade beyond the point of being useful. The people involved move on with their lives, and the case becomes a file in a box in a storage room somewhere. That doesn't mean we give up. That doesn't mean we stop asking questions or stop demanding answers. Every person who goes missing deserves to be found. Every family deserves closure. Every case deserves justice. Her daughters deserve to know what happened to their mother. They deserve to know whether she's alive or dead. If she's dead, they deserve to be able to bury her, to grieve her, to honor her memory properly. If she's alive, they deserve the chance to reconnect with her, to understand why she left, to rebuild whatever relationship is possible. Her other family members, the ones who reported her missing, the ones who have spent 16 years wondering and worrying, they deserve answers too. They deserve to know whether they could have done something differently. They deserve to stop blaming themselves for not reporting her missing sooner or not intervening more in her life. And she deserves justice. If she died of an accidental overdose and someone panicked and hid her body, that person needs to be held accountable. If she was murdered, her killer needs to be found and prosecuted. If she's alive somewhere and unable to contact her family for some reason, she deserves to be found and helped. The fact that she struggled with addiction doesn't make her less deserving of justice. The fact that she had a criminal record doesn't make her less worthy of being found. The fact that she lost custody of her children doesn't make her disappearance less tragic. She was a human being, a mother, a daughter, a sister. She mattered. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case is thinking about those letters she wrote to her daughters. She was making plans. She was hoping for a better future. She wanted to cook Thanksgiving dinner. She wanted to move into an apartment. She wanted to find a job. These are simple, ordinary hopes that most of us take for granted. But for her, they represented a dream of stability, of normalcy, of being able to provide for herself and maybe eventually for her daughters. Those letters are evidence of her humanity, of her hope, of her love for her children. They're proof that addiction hadn't destroyed everything in her. She was still fighting. She was still trying. And then something happened that ended that fight, that silenced that hope, that separated her from her daughters permanently. What would she think if she could see her daughters now, 16 years later? What would she want to say to them? What would she want them to know about what happened to her? If she died accidentally, she would probably want them to know it wasn't their fault, that she loved them, that her addiction was a disease that she fought as hard as she could. If she was killed, she would probably want her killer brought to justice. She would want her daughters to know the truth. She would want them to be able to move forward with their lives without the weight of uncertainty. And if, against all odds, she's alive somewhere, what would she want to say? Would she apologize for the pain her disappearance has caused? Would she explain why she hasn't contacted them? Would there be any explanation that could make sense of 16 years of silence? The realistic probability is that she's deceased. After 16 years of no contact, no sightings, no financial activity, no use of her social security number, the likelihood that she's alive is very small. But until there's proof, until there are remains that can be identified, her family lives in that terrible limbo of not knowing. This uncertainty is its own kind of torture. It means you can never fully grieve because there's always that tiny possibility that they're alive somewhere. It means every time the phone rings, every time there's a knock at the door, there's a split second of hope that maybe, finally, there will be news. And then the disappointment when it's not about your missing loved one. This cycle repeats over and over, year after year, for decades. Research on families of missing persons has shown that this ambiguous loss can be more difficult to cope with than the certainty of death. At least with death, there's a finality that allows the grieving process to move forward. With a missing person, the grief is frozen. You can't move on because there's no closure. You're stuck in the moment they disappeared, unable to move forward or backward. For her daughters, this has meant growing up without knowing what happened to their mother. Every milestone in their lives, every achievement, every struggle, has been shadowed by her absence and the mystery of her disappearance. Graduation, first jobs, relationships, possibly children of their own, all experienced without their mother and without knowing why she's not there. The psychological impact of this kind of loss on children is profound and lasting. Studies have shown that children who lose a parent to unexplained disappearance often struggle with trust issues, abandonment fears, and difficulty forming secure attachments in their own relationships. They may develop anxiety disorders or depression. They may have trouble with identity formation because a crucial part of their family history is missing. One of her daughters believes she died of an overdose. This belief, whether accurate or not, serves a psychological function. It provides an explanation that makes sense given what they knew about their mother's struggles. It allows them to believe she didn't choose to leave them, that her disappearance wasn't a rejection of them. It's a way of making meaning out of something that otherwise makes no sense. But belief isn't the same as knowledge. Even with this belief, they don't have certainty. They don't have proof. They can't point to a death certificate or a grave or a confirmed set of remains and say, "This is what happened to our mother." They're left with a belief that helps them cope but doesn't give them the closure they need. Let's return to the investigation and think about what we know and what we don't know. We know she was last seen on November 13th, 2008, at a house on Highway 41 in Leeds, Alabama. We know she was living with a man at that address. We know she disappeared without taking her daughter's phone calls or maintaining the regular contact she had always maintained. We know that 69 days later, her family reported her missing. We know that when police investigated, the boyfriend said she had gone to Houston to be with someone she met on Facebook. We know that when police tracked down the man in Houston, he said he hadn't seen her in years. We know she had a history of prescription drug abuse and possibly other substance dependencies. We know she may have had mental health issues. We know she had lost custody of her daughters but maintained regular weekly contact with them. We know she had a pattern of staying with family members and then moving in with boyfriends. We know she had pleaded guilty to theft and drug possession in 2008 and received a conditional suspended sentence. We know a warrant was issued in January 2009 for failing to comply with the terms of that sentence. We know she wrote letters to her daughters before she disappeared, talking about finding a job, moving into an apartment with her boyfriend, and cooking Thanksgiving dinner. We know these letters suggested she was making plans for the future, not preparing to disappear. That's what we know. But what don't we know? We don't know what happened on November 13th, 2008, or in the days immediately before or after. We don't know if she left the house voluntarily or if something happened to her there. We don't know if she's alive or dead. We don't know if her disappearance was accidental, voluntary, or the result of foul play. We don't know the true nature of her relationship with the boyfriend. We don't know if there was violence in that relationship or if it was relatively stable. We don't know why his story about Houston didn't check out, whether it was a deliberate lie or a misunderstanding. We don't know if she was involved in anything dangerous in the days before she disappeared. We don't know if she owed money to someone or if she witnessed something she shouldn't have. We don't know if there were other people involved in whatever happened to her. We don't know where her remains are, if she's deceased. We don't know if she's buried somewhere, hidden in a rural area, or if something else happened to her body that has prevented it from being found. These are the crucial unknowns that make this case so difficult to solve. And without new information, without someone coming forward with answers, these questions may never be answered. But there's always hope. Cases have been solved after much longer than 16 years. People have come forward with information decades after a crime was committed. Technology has advanced to the point where evidence that was useless in 2009 might be valuable now. The investigation isn't over just because time has passed. If you're watching this and you have any information about this case, please come forward. Even if you think what you know is insignificant, it might be the piece of the puzzle that investigators need. Even if you're afraid of getting in trouble or implicating yourself in something, there are ways to provide information anonymously. There are tip lines that protect your identity. Think about those two daughters who have spent 16 years not knowing what happened to their mother. Think about the family members who have carried this burden of not knowing, of wondering, of hoping and despairing in equal measure. Think about the woman herself, who had hopes and dreams and plans for the future, who wanted to cook Thanksgiving dinner and find a job and be a mother to her children. Someone out there knows something. Maybe you know what happened that day on Highway 41. Maybe you helped dispose of evidence. Maybe you heard something secondhand from someone involved. Maybe you saw something that didn't seem important at the time but makes more sense now. Whatever you know, please share it. You could bring closure to a family that has been suffering for 16 years. You could bring justice for a woman who deserves it. This case represents so many of the systemic failures in how we handle missing persons, especially missing persons who are marginalized or vulnerable. It represents the failure to act quickly when someone is reported missing, the failure to adequately investigate disappearances of people with addiction or criminal histories, the failure to maintain public attention on cases that don't fit certain demographics, the failure to provide adequate support and resources to families of missing persons. But it also represents the resilience of families who refuse to give up, who keep searching for answers year after year. It represents the dedication of cold case investigators who continue to work these cases even when the trail is cold. It represents the power of public attention and advocacy in keeping these cases alive. Every time someone watches this video, reads about this case, shares it with others, it increases the chance that someone with information will come forward. It keeps her name and her story in the public consciousness. It reminds people that she mattered, that her disappearance matters, that finding answers matters. So I'm asking you to share this video, post it on your social media, send it to people you know. Keep this case alive. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers, because every missing person deserves to be found, and every family deserves closure. This is Cold Case Unsealed, and we're not giving up on this case. We're not going to let her be forgotten. We're going to keep telling her story, keep asking questions, keep pushing for answers, because that's what justice requires. That's what her daughters deserve. That's what she deserves. If you believe in justice, if you believe that every missing person matters, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these important cases. Drop a comment with your theories, your thoughts, or just to show your support for this family. Your engagement matters. Keeps these cases alive. It increases the chances that someone with information will see this and come forward. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for refusing to let these forgotten cases stay forgotten. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can bring justice to those who deserve it. This woman, this mother, this daughter, this sister, she deserves justice. And we're not going to stop fighting until she gets it. See you in the next case.